Order. The sitting is now resumed. The reason for the suspension was because the statement, which under the Ministerial Code should have been delivered a minimum 45 minutes prior to the statement being made, was delivered late. And I know that the Secretary of State will want to look into the matter and report back to the Speaker. Secretary of State.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you. And can I apologise profusely to the House, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that a copy of my statement was not provided to the Mr. Speaker and indeed to the opposition front benches sufficiently in advance of my statement today. Mr. Speaker, before I make my statement, may I take this as my first opportunity in the House to say how saddened I was by the passing of Frank Field, a true champion of welfare reform, who was always prepared to work across party. And whilst we did not always agree on all matters, his belief that welfare means transforming lives is one that I share and that I admire. Mr. Deputy Speaker, with permission, I will make a statement on the consultation we are launching today on the changes to personal independence payment, which aim to create a benefit system that can best support disabled people and people with long-term health conditions to live full and independent lives. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government's priority is to make sure that our welfare system is fair and compassionate. Fair on the taxpayer by ensuring that people of working age who can work do work, and fair on those who are in most need of the state's help. Welfare at its best is about more than just benefit payments. It is about changing lives for the better. In recent years, the government has delivered successive reforms to create a system that is fairer and more compassionate whilst providing value for the taxpayer. We have reformed an outdated and complex legacy benefit system and introduced universal credit, a new modern benefit that ensures people are better off in work than on benefits. Last year, we published a landmark white paper announcing significant reforms to focus the welfare system on what people can do rather than what they cannot. We're delivering our £2.5 billion Back to Work plan, substantially expanding the employment support to help more disabled people and people with health conditions to start, stay and succeed in work. Our reforms to the work capability assessment will better reflect the opportunities in the modern world of work and ensure more people get the support that they need to move into employment whilst protecting those unable to work. And in February, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we published the Disability Action Plan to make this country the most accessible place in the world for people to live, work and to thrive. In addition to this, the government has provided unprecedented help for the most vulnerable. This includes implementing one of the largest cost of living support packages in Europe, which prevented 1.3 million people from falling into absolute poverty during a time of global inflationary pressures. We have increased benefits by 6.7% and we have raised the local housing allowance, benefiting 1.6 million households by around £800 this year on average. Our approach to transforming the benefit system for disabled people and those with long-term health conditions is guided by three important priorities: providing the right support to the people who need it most, targeting our resources most effectively, and supporting disabled people to reach their full potential and to live independently. Mr. Deputy Speaker, although we've made significant progress, the disability benefit system for adults of working age is not consistently providing support in the way that was intended. It has been more than a decade since the introduction of PIP. The intention was it would be more sustainable, a more dynamic benefit that would provide better targeted support to help disabled people with the extra costs arising from their disability. However, since then, the nature and understanding of disability and ill health in Britain has changed profoundly, and the clinical case mix has evolved in line with these broader changes, including many more people applying for disability benefits with mental health and neurodivergent conditions. Since 2015, the proportion of the caseload receiving the highest rate of PIP has increased from 25% to 36%. 7% of working age people in England and Wales are now claiming PIP or DLA, which is forecast to rise to 10% by 2028-29. In 22-23, the government spent £15.7 billion on extra costs disability benefits for people of working age in England and Wales, and the OBR has forecast that cost will rise to £29.8 billion in nominal terms by 28-29. There are now over 33,000 new awards for PIP per month. This figure has almost doubled since the pandemic. Mr Deputy Speaker, with almost a quarter of the adult population now reporting a disability, up from 16% in 2013, I believe that now is the time for a new conversation about the benefits system and how it can best support people to live full and independent lives. Today, Mr Deputy Speaker, I am launching a consultation to explore changes that could be made to the current PIP system to ensure support is focused where it is most needed. These options include making changes to eligibility criteria for PIP, redesigning the PIP assessment to better target it towards the individual needs of disabled people and people with health conditions, including exploring whether people with specific health conditions or disabilities can be taken out of PIP assessments altogether, reforming the PIP assessment so that it is more linked to a person's condition. We are also consulting on whether we should make fundamental changes to the way we provide support to disabled people and people with a health condition. We know that any additional costs arising from a disability or health condition, which PIP is intended to help with, can vary significantly and are unique to the individual circumstances. Some people on PIP may have relatively small one-off costs, such as walking aids or aids to help with eating and drinking, or ongoing additional costs related to their disability or health conditions, such as help around the home or running a ventilator. For some claimants, their costs will be fully covered by their award, while others may find the current system does not provide enough support to meet their needs. Yet the current system operates a one-size-fits-all model and doesn't channel people towards bespoke support tailored to individuals' needs. We recognise that better, more targeted support could be provided by other local services. Our plans include exploring how the welfare system could be improved with new approaches to providing support. These include moving away from a fixed cash benefit system so people can receive more tailored support in line with their needs, exploring how to better align the support that PIP offers with existing services and offers of support available to disabled people and people with health conditions, exploring alternative ways of supporting people to live independent and fulfilling lives. This could mean financial support being better targeted at people who have specific extra costs, but it could also involve improved support of other kinds, such as respite care or physical or mental health treatment, aiming to achieve better outcomes for individuals. Crucially, we want to explore whether we can achieve our aims within the current structure of health and disability benefits or whether wider change is needed. We are consulting over the next 12 weeks to seek views from across society, including disabled people and representative organisations, to ensure everyone has a chance to shape welfare reforms that will modernise the support provided through the benefit system. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know that these reforms are significant in their scale and their ambition, but we will not shy away from the challenges facing our welfare system today. We owe that to the millions of people who rely upon it and to the hard-working people whose taxes underpin it. That is what the next generation of welfare reforms are all about. These proposals will help create a benefit system that can better support disabled people and people with long-term health conditions to live full and independent lives, and are a crucial part of my mission to ensure the welfare system is both fair and compassionate and provides the right help to those who need it most. Mr Deputy Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for his comments about Frank Field. Both myself and my friend for Wallasey here on the front bench with me thought the world of Frank, and I thank the Secretary of State for his tribute to a person who was completely unique in every way. And with regards to the advance site of his statement, I would say apology accepted. We'll carefully review the detail in this Green Paper, because the country that we want on this side is one where disabled people have the same right to a good job and help to get it as anyone else. We'll judge any measure the government brings forward on its merits and against that principle, because the costs of failure in this area are unsustainable. The autonomy and routine of work is good for us all, for our mental and physical health, and more than that, for women, work is freedom too. Now, I've read the Secretary of State's jibes about Labour today. He says he doesn't know what our position is on a set of reforms he hasn't set out. The Prime Minister made a speech 2 weeks ago about this issue, but every single day since then, the government have failed to publish this Green Paper. The Secretary of State wants my views on his, until this moment, unpublished thoughts. What was the problem? Was the printer jammed? Or rather, was it that the Prime Minister and Secretary of State realised that as soon as they published this Green Paper, everyone would realise the truth about this government? Like the Prime Minister that leads it, it is long on questions and short when it comes to the answers. Because this Green Paper is not a plan, it's an exam that the Secretary of State is hoping he will never have to sit. The reason he wants to know Labour's plan is that he suspects he will be long gone before any of this is a reality. So can the Secretary of State tell me where this Green Paper leaves the government's earlier half-baked plan to scrap the work capability assessment, given that the idea behind that was to use the PIP assessment? He says some health conditions can be taken out of PIP assessments. Which conditions are we talking about? Now, PIP was the creation of a Conservative government, so where is the analysis of what's gone wrong? PIP replaced DLA, and now we're saying PIP is the problem, so how many more times are we going round this same roundabout? Do the government's plans involve treating people with mental and physical health differently? And can he explain the legal basis for doing so? And importantly, on health itself. Isn't this Green Paper actually a huge admission of the Tory failure on the NHS, in that it takes as its starting point the fact that people today simply cannot get the treatment and the care they need? What will the costs of any new system be, particularly any extra support, the kind that he's mentioned? And will we actually see a white paper before a general election? Now, I am standing in today and for the next few weeks for my friend, the member for Leicester West. And she believes that health and work are two sides of the same coin. And it's that insight that the government is missing today. Because I ask myself, Mr. Deputy Speaker, how we got here. The country today is sicker, and that is the legacy of this government. NHS waiting lists are longer than they've ever been, and that is the Secretary of State's party's legacy. And if he doesn't know how bad things are in mental health care, he only needs to ask the member for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich. 2.8 million people are locked out of work due to long-term sickness, and that's this Conservative legacy. Like ice on our potholed roads, the Tories have widened the cracks in our economy and society, making them all much worse. And with respect to mental health, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in recent weeks, the Secretary of State has decided to speak out of both sides of his mouth. On the one hand, he says, "I'm grateful for today's more open approach to mental health." And with the same breath, he tells us there is danger that this has gone too far. He wants it both ways. He thinks that openness about mental health is good, but then says the very thing that brings back the stigma. Every time the Secretary of State speaks, he makes it less likely that people will be open about their mental health. And on behalf of all of us who've ever had a panic attack at work or worse, can I say to him that stigma stops people from getting treatment, it makes getting help harder, and it keeps people out of work, not in it. A Labour government will take a totally different approach. Not only will we make sure there's more appointments, but we'll also have an extra 8,500 mental health staff. The last Labour government delivered highest patient satisfaction on record, and that's the record on which we will build. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the issue we're discussing today is bigger than just health. It's also about work. And because of our commitment to serve working people, we will make work better too. We'll have the New Deal for working people, improving rights for the first time in a generation, and we will drive up employment in every region because we will devolve employment support and end the tick box culture in job centres. We will tear down the barriers to work for disabled people and provide help for young people, and that will get Britain working again. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Harold Wilson said that unemployment, above all else, made him political. And those of us who grew up seeing people thrown on the scrap heap in the 80s and 90s feel the same. And every young person out of work today will never forget whose hand was on the tiller when these Tories robbed them of hope. It's time for a change and a general election.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, could I thank the Honourable Lady for her response and thank her for the gracious manner in which she accepted my earlier apology. That is very much appreciated. She says that, Mr Deputy Speaker, that she cannot be expected to be able to comment on the PIP proposals. I would remind her that the work capability assessment proposals went through a consultation, and we came forward with proposals there. We still don't know where the Labour Party stand on those. We have spoken about fit note reforms, and we are setting up Wirral, and in the autumn we'll be trialling some of those fit note possibilities. We do not know where the Labour Party stands at all on those particular matters. And as to PIP, one would have thought, Mr Deputy Speaker, that given the central role that it plays in the welfare system in our society and in our country, that the Labour Party would have some kind of view on that benefit. But on that matter, Mr Deputy Speaker, we hear precisely nothing, because the party opposite, I am afraid, has no plan, and the consequence of that, Mr Speaker, will be that, as under previous Labour governments, of course, the welfare bill will continue to spiral out of control, and that will fall to hard-working families up and down the country to pay by way of higher taxation. She asked specifically, Mr Deputy Speaker, about the abolition of the work capability assessment that she is absolutely right is set out in the white paper that we published. Those measures will not be due to come into effect until 2026, and we will of course take into account the conclusions that may be drawn as a result of this consultation when we consider that particular matter. She raised numerous other questions, which actually, many of which actually are raised within the consultation itself, and I'm sure she will be actively taking part in that consultation as we work towards the answer to those questions. I was rather surprised, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the Honourable Lady raised the NHS. This is the party that is spending more on the National Health Service than at any time in its history, a 13% increase in real terms in spending over the last couple of years, 21,000 nurses, more, additional nurses, 7,000 more doctors in the last 12 months alone, 2.4 billion in additional spend on mental health services, to which she referred from the next year onwards, and that's on top of the additional 4.7 billion that the Chancellor set aside for more mental health treatments previously, and at the last fiscal event, 400,000 additional talking therapies within the National Health Service. She concluded, Mr Speaker, by referring to Harold Wilson and his comments on unemployment. I simply refer her to the fact that under every single Labour government in the history of this country, unemployment has been higher at the end of their term of office than it was when they came into office.
Caroline Nokes.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. A constituent of mine who has cerebral palsy has been in touch this afternoon to outline how he currently uses PIP, giving him the freedom to live independently and work full-time, but he uses it to buy mobility aids, hoists, wheelchairs, etc. His concern is that any changes to PIP might push those costs onto the NHS and reduce the flexibility that he currently has to choose what he spends the money on and indeed when. And he doesn't want to be pushed into a cycle of renewal that perhaps is too rapid and therefore costs the NHS more money. What reassurance can my right honourable friend give that this consultation is absolutely going to enable those sort of concerns to be highlighted, and that long term this is going to give more choice and not restrict his freedom?
Well, I thank my honourable friend very much indeed for that question and for raising the issue of her constituent. The reassurance that I can give her is that we are aiming here for the best outcomes. There will be a number of ways in which those best outcomes may be achieved, and that is the purpose of the consultation. But I think it is reasonable to explore at least this issue of whether cash transfer payments are always the right solution, particularly, in fact, given the growth in mental health conditions that we're seeing in more recent times. And the final point that I would make, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that we are absolutely interested in examples or situations where people have lifelong regressive illnesses from which unfortunately they are not going to recover, and to ask that question as to whether under those circumstances it's right to require people to go through reassessments.
Mr Blackman.
Day and the announcement that was made a couple of weeks ago, and all of these changes that are proposed People are scared about this. They are scared because they rely on these payments. They have changed their lives. They've been able to access support that they otherwise would not have been able to access. It's very clear that the changes that are being announced are not being created by disabled people, with disabled people at the heart of the decision-making process. This is a government consultation. And then people are being asked to input into that. It's totally different from the situation in Scotland, where the adult disability payment was created with disabled people in the room, talking about the best way in which to actually make these payments work, and the best way to have assessment processes, which basically the answer that came back was do not do them anything like the assessment processes for PIP. Mr Deputy Speaker, everybody should have the income to live with dignity, whether or not they're able to work. I'm massively concerned by the comments that the Minister has allegedly made, and the Prime Minister has allegedly made, about people with mental health difficulties have only facing the ordinary difficulties of life. It's very clear that anybody who is able to say that has not suffered from depression, has not felt that absolute energy sappingness that you get that comes alongside suffering with depression or suffering with anxiety. These are real conditions. These are real things that people are struggling with, and that lack of ability to work is just as serious for people with mental health conditions as it can be for people with physical health conditions. A couple of specific questions on this. In relation to universal credit, it's a gateway benefit. Can the Secretary of State assure us that any changes that might be made to eligibility criteria around universal credit will be fully consulted on and fully discussed, particularly with anybody that administers benefits that are allowed through those gateway benefits? And then in relation to the adult disability payments, has the Secretary of State spoken to the Scottish Government about the creation of that system with disabled people in the room, about ensuring that at the forefront of every decision in relation to that is dignity and respect? Those are the two key the two key columns in relation to the Scottish benefit system, and I think that the Secretary of State could learn a lot from that approach.
Respect.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady for her response to my statement, and can I reassure her that, of course, disabled people will be very much involved in the process, in the consultation. It will be a 12-week consultation, and of course we will take them and representative organisations of them and their comments extremely seriously. Could I also say that her comments about the importance of recognising that many people unfortunately suffer from very serious mental health challenges is extremely well made, and I'm absolutely determined that this government, and whatever conclusions we draw from this consultation, should lead us to a position where we were actually better able to support people who are in those circumstances. The answer to her question about as to whether there will be within the consultation questions around the passporting of PIP into other benefits, the answer to that is yes, it is something that we are most certainly consulting on. And in terms of the Scottish equivalent of PIP, because of course this is a devolved matter, yes, of course we have as a department been in discussions with our equivalents within the civil service and officials within the Scottish Government, and we are looking forward to considering, and as I know the Scottish Government will be, the independent review of that benefit that's being conducted at the present time.
Nigel Mills.
Thank you. Could I ask the Secretary of State about his comments about the one-size-fits-all model not working because people have a very different costs they incur from their disability? Is he surely not expecting people to send in invoices to prove the amount of support they need? So is he looking at having more tiers of reward, like DLA used to have 3 tiers rather than 2? Is that one of the options he's after to try and reduce costs?
Mistake.
Well, by one-size-fits-all, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think what I'm saying is that I think we should explore whether that approach that we have at the moment is the best one in terms of outcomes. We have much to learn, I think, from the experience of other countries around the world who have a similar benefit but go about the organisation and application of that benefit in a different way. New Zealand, for example, does indeed, as my honourable friend has suggested, make payments based on invoices submitted for equipment by those who are receiving the benefit. Norway, for example, doesn't have assessments in the way that we do. They rely more on medical evidence provided by medical practitioners. So I think we should go into this with an open mind. And bear in mind, Mr Deputy Speaker, there's been no fundamental review of PIP for over a decade.
Chair of the Select Committee, Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. PIP assessment providers confirm that worsening delays for NHS treatment are a big factor in the increase in the number of people applying for PIP. He's confirmed this afternoon that the work capability assessment is to be scrapped, to be replaced by PIP assessments. In the case of people who are too ill to work but not disabled and so not eligible for PIP, how is their support going to be assessed in the absence of work capability assessments?
Well, Mr Speaker, as I think I've set out, we will need to look at the conclusions that may be drawn from this consultation in the context of the future of the work capability assessment, and as the Honourable Gentleman rightly says, the replacement of that with PIP as a gateway into future universal credit health benefits. These are questions that are being asked within the consultation itself.
Ruth Edwards.
Mr Deputy Speaker, in the spring of 2019, before I was elected, I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. I was extremely ill with it and I couldn't work for several months. So I know firsthand how debilitating it can be. But I also know that with treatment and support, you can lead a fulfilling career and a normal life, and it's extremely rewarding. So I would like to ask the Minister, because I would have been devastated to be out of the workforce long term, I would like to ask him how the reforms in the Green Paper will help anxiety sufferers to get the treatment and support they need to return to work, yes, but also to take back their lives.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend for a powerful and moving contribution to this statement today, and say how pleased I am that she is in such fine form nowadays, knowing her as well as I do. The answer to a question, Mr Deputy Speaker, lies in the consultation itself and the recognition that the one-size-fits-all approach is not necessarily the right one, and those that she describes may well be better served through receiving treatment rather than cash transfer benefits. That is not a preconceived outcome that I have in my mind, but it is one of the possibilities on which we are seeking opinions.
Houseofcommons.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the charity Sense has criticised the government's narrative around disability benefits, highlighting the divisive and deeply damaging language used which further stigmatises some of the most vulnerable people in society. Disabled people have told Sense that they are sick with worry that they might lose their personal independence payments, which provide a vital lifeline for them. Does the Secretary of State not think disabled people need more support, given the Tory cost of living crisis we have been in for multiple years, and not dangerous rhetoric that costs them as an undeserving?
Well, we're certainly not stigmatising anybody, Mr Deputy Speaker, far from it. And indeed, in the consultation, it is explicitly recognised there may be some disabled people who actually need additional help to the help that they're getting at the moment. And I did make reference earlier to those who have lifetime progressive illnesses and conditions that sadly are not going to improve. The question is being asked, do we need for those individuals to ask them to attend reassessments, jump through bureaucratic hoops and the anxiety that may go with that, or should we have a better system that better looks after them?
Dame Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I totally agree with the Secretary of State that everyone gets dignity from being in work, but he will be aware of the very high levels of unemployment experienced by those with learning disabilities and autism, and bearing in mind that able-bodied people over 50 struggle to find work, let alone those with a disability or long-term health condition. What does he propose doing to actually change the attitude of employers here, to recognise that everybody has a skill, everybody has a role to play, and everyone is an asset?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for that really pertinent question. She will be familiar with the Blackman review, which is now reported. That was a review that I was very keen when it came across my desk to pursue and made my officials available and the infrastructure available to make sure that that review was able to go ahead. And that indeed does address many of the issues to which she is quite rightly pointing in terms of employers accommodating and benefiting from those that have autism and other conditions.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I start by commending the Honourable Member for Rushcliffe for her comments? I think that really brings to the heart some of the things that we are discussing here. But I think one of the challenges for the Government is when they're talking about PIP, they've started this whole conversation with the Back to Work plan, which for many disabled people makes it feel that this is about getting them back to work and reducing the overall welfare budget, as opposed to PIP, which is supposed to be about ensuring that they get the right support for their disabilities. But in relation to PIP, one of the big challenges that we all deal with as MPs is about the number of errors in the system, and particularly how many end up at tribunal. If we're looking at a system that is going to more target support, what assurances can the Secretary of State give us that actually this is going to be a better system with less errors in it?
Well, Mr Speaker, two points there. Firstly, in terms of errors in the benefits system, they are relatively rare in terms of overpayments, underpayments and so on. In terms of the way that we approach those that have long-term sickness or disability, I would remind her, she referred to the Back to Work plan, that around that we're giving the 2.8 million people who are on those long-term benefits the opportunity to try work without fear of losing those benefits at all. We've made that extremely explicit, and that is simply freeing up the system and trying to get rid of some of those barriers that are otherwise faced by those people.
Will Quince.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I need to read the detail, but on the face of it, there is much to be welcomed in the Secretary of State's statement. However, there are 2.6 million DLA and PIP working age recipients and their families who will no doubt be concerned about the future of their support. So can my right honourable friend assure the House that he will tread carefully, that he will think really carefully about the tone and the language that we use, and that we listen to those with lived experience and the charities who support them?
Well, can I thank Mr Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend. I know he has done a great deal in the very important area that this statement and this consultation is addressing, and my door is always open to him, as he knows, at every step of the way to listen to the thoughts that he has. I can assure him that questions of tone and language and treading carefully are absolutely at the forefront of my mind.
Shiamura.
Mr Deputy Speaker. There are 4,500 people in Newcastle Central who are out of the workforce, economically inactive due to disability or ill health. The government has failed them when it comes to the benefit system, failed them when it comes to supporting to work, which is so important, and failed them when it comes to the NHS. How will the £46 billion black hole in the government's plans to abolish national insurance payments, how will that enable the government to fix their failings?
Well, on the political points that have just been made, Mr Deputy Speaker, I should point out that when it comes to economic inactivity, that is at a lower level today than under every single year of the last Labour government. That is our record compared to that of her party. She will know full well that the 46 billion figure and the aspiration to reduce still further and finally eliminate national insurance is a very long-term aspiration. I understand why the Labour Party tried to make it more than that, but in terms of things that are more than that, I would point to the £28 billion that her party has suggested will be made available for the energy net zero offering that her party is still talking about with the electorate.
Chloe Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I commend the Secretary of State's approach here as being entirely realistic, given that the disability benefits system is not consistently providing support in the way that it was meant to. And he's also right to take this strategic look, because it is correct that the understanding of disability and ill health in Britain has changed quite significantly, including in some ways for the better. And we have an imperative in our labour market and in our broader economy. Now, I think he's also been correct to be comprehensive in his approach across today's Green Paper and the prior White Paper and other connected pieces of work. That's absolutely correct. So could he go on to be comprehensive in delivering this across government? Can he give us assurances of how he is setting up the work that will be needed for success here, including with the NHS and also local authorities for those who need support with their disability or ill health, including with the NHS for work for those who wish to get into work? It is my understanding that the NHS perhaps knows less than it could do about how it could be helping people in their individual lives holistically to move back into work or onto the things that those people need and care very much about. And finally, how is he working with employers to ensure that we are unlocking the productivity of the workforce that is needed in this country?
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for her very astute comments, built on a great deal of experience of exactly the issues that we are discussing, both as Secretary of State and before that as a very successful minister looking after this area at DWP. And she is absolutely right to recognise the fact that society has changed a great deal in the last 10 years since this benefit was fundamentally reviewed in the past. I will, of course, continue to work very closely with my colleagues in the National Health Service and DHSC. We have collaborated on setting up something called Workwell, which will be rolled out this autumn, bringing together the world of work with healthcare, and that will be being rolled out to 15 of the 42 health areas within England. And the white paper itself, to her point about local authorities, does specifically invite thoughts on how local authorities could be more involved in PIP or any successor to PIP. And on the question of employers, she's absolutely right to raise that. And I've no doubt she will be aware of the 2 consultations that we have run around occupational health and how we increase that within employers where they have a particularly important role to play.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State questioned the need potentially for reassessments for certain groups. I can certainly tell him, after having visited my local MND Association support group, that's one group who absolutely don't need or deserve reassessment in future. But on the wider point about mental health conditions, I hope that he is going to be talking to his colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care, because I certainly have many experiences of constituents waiting months, if not years, for assessments for neurodivergent conditions and for mental health support. And clearly we cannot deal with the issues that he wants to in this consultation if we do not fix the NHS workforce crisis in the first place.
Well, the honourable gentleman does raise a very important point, particularly around mental health, and I can reassure him, as I just have done tonight with my right honourable friend, that we will continue to work very closely with DHSC on these proposals as they emerge. I did mention earlier, in response to an earlier question, that the Chancellor has brought forward funding for 400,000 additional talking therapies within the NHS, for example, which I think will be a very important part of what we may develop here going forward.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And compassion has to be at the heart of this consultation. I've seen patients who had to be reassessed over and over again, which didn't seem fair. But I've also seen patients who don't engage with services, don't take medications, and they're yet still signed off. And that isn't compassionate either. One practical way to do this is actually to bring DWP closer into GP surgery so that people can have their hands held when they get a diagnosis, be it anxiety, physical or recovering for an operation. Is that something he'd consider in this consultation? Because I think joining in primary care will be a fantastic way not only to help the GPs, help the patients and help those in DWP.
That's right.
Who's that?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for a very sensible set of questions. He refers to the importance of bringing together GPs with advice and support to get into work. That is very much the focus of our Fit Note reforms, Mr Deputy Speaker, upon which we have a call for evidence out at the moment.
Sir Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful, first of all, to the Minister for his swift response to my request earlier this afternoon for support for the people at Everest in Treherbert who look likely to lose their jobs over the next few days. But can I ask him, depression and anxiety are real, aren't they? It's not just a question of people pulling up their socks, as some people have suggested in the crueler parts of the commentariat. All too often, talking therapies are least available in the areas with the highest levels of economic inactivity. So how are we going to change that? And on the matter of that intersection between mental health and physical health, namely acquired brain injury, does the department even know how many people who've had an acquired brain injury are in receipt of PIP or of universal credit? If he doesn't know the answer today, could he write to me? And if he doesn't know the answer, and if his department doesn't know the answer, which I bet is the case, can he make sure that they do actually find out before they implement something which could provide even more problems for people who are really trying to get their lives back together?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I firstly thank him for his comments about the job situation in his constituency and reassure him that my department will do whatever it possibly can to assist with those circumstances. He is right to point out that depression and anxiety and mental health conditions are very real, and in many cases they're extremely severe, which is why I am absolutely determined that we should do whatever we can where it is appropriate to provide as much support as we possibly can to those people. In terms of his question about acquired brain injury and how many PIP recipients are in that situation, then clearly I don't think he'd expect me to know off the top of my head. It'd be rather impressive if I did, but I will, as he has suggested, write to him. That's quite true. That's probably fair. And the honourable gentleman, the honourable gentleman, as he points out, has known me for a very long time when we were at university together, when I remember he was a young Conservative, as I was at that time in his life. How things have progressed, or should I say regressed, since then.
Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that my proposals over the past few years to improve support in the workplace for mental health are essential as part of this programme of work, and that one of those aspects would be my work and my suggestions repeatedly to make sure that physical and mental health in the Health and Safety Executive Guidelines are given firm parity, because I believe it will help my constituents, both employers and employees, both in Watford and nationally. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right. We are considering the issue of parity that he has raised, but he is right to raise this issue of mental health support, occupational health support within businesses, which is why we have consulted on that matter. And I'm particularly keen, not just for large companies, but to see what we can do for SMEs to make sure that they engage more fully in that respect.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I've already had a considerable number of constituents contact me very worried about what the government is proposing, and the key message they want to get across is that having disabilities or a serious mental illness is not their choice. It's not something they choose to do, it's not something they have control over. But can I ask, throughout his statement he mentions tailored support an awful lot. My experience is that when people have, with disabilities, have engagement with the system and have to go through the process where they're making applications, being assessed and so on, that is a cause of great anxiety, and often the decisions are wrong. So if he's proposing more tailored support, more engagement with bureaucracy, particularly for people with fluctuating conditions like ME, how is he going to get it right? Because he's not managed to get it right so far.
Well, I'm absolutely determined, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we're not going to be seeing more bureaucracy, and indeed I set out that one of the questions we are exploring within the consultation is this matter of those that sadly have conditions from which they are not going to recover or improve, very sadly, and under those circumstances I want to see less bureaucracy. I want to see a system where we're not actually having to, in a superfluous way, reassess people and put them to that anxiety and that inconvenience. Other points that she raises, of course, are exactly the kind of questions that we're asking in the consultation, and I would urge her constituents that have written to her to engage in that consultation process over the next 3 months.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement? I think he's right to emphasise the importance about focusing on what people can do rather than what they cannot. And it's worth noting that there are 2.2 million more disabled people in work than just 10 years ago. But it's not just about work. He mentioned that the benefit system is to ensure people live full and independent lives. And in this consultation, he mentioned engagement with disabled people and their representative organisations. But this is absolutely critical, as each individual's needs are personal to them. So how is he going to ensure that in this consultation he is listening to as many voices as he possibly can?
Well, the consultation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, will be very thorough. It is also available in accessible formats to make sure that we cater to the greatest extent that we can to get the best possible and the most universal feedback that we can. I was pleased that he spoke to the issue of the employment of disabled people. In 2017, we set a 10-year target for having 1 million more disabled people in employment. We broke that target in 5 years rather than 10.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Announcing that disabled people suffering from certain conditions would no longer receive support payments, but they will instead get improved access to treatment, is frankly one of the most absurd policies that has ever come out of this government in the last 14 years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government plan relies on this imaginary, brilliant support available in mental health care. So I asked the Minister, is he even aware how long people are having to wait for treatment after being referred? Because after 14 years of this Tory government gutting our NHS and our mental health care, even basic access to treatment doesn't exist, let alone this improved access that the Minister is relying on in this fantasy world he lives in.
Well, I simply don't recognise the comments that the Honourable Gentleman has made about our National Health Service. It has more people working within the National Health Service than at any time in its history. 21,000 more nurses, 7,000 more doctors in the last year alone. We are spending a record sum on the National Health Service, and I won't go through chapter and verse as I did earlier as to the other things that we are doing, but we are completely committed to the health of the and mental health of people up and down this country. There will be new ways of doing things, and if we don't have a grown-up conversation, as I describe it, about these matters, we will not discover those new ways. Work Well is a completely new way of addressing issues such as mental health and encouraging people to go back into work or to stay into work. That was something that didn't exist 18 months ago, and it came about because we consulted with people and we came up with a solution.
Stephen Partland.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I would like to give the Secretary of State the benefit of the doubt, and I believe he said a number of important points, but there are 2.6 million people who will have heard the statement today, and their families will be absolutely terrified. I think a lot of those people will feel that this is just about providing some kind of cuts to services, and I believe that we need to try and support those people and put compassion at the heart of our welfare system. There are reports of up to 2 million people waiting for mental health treatment at the moment. So does the Secretary of State believe that in this compassionate review, where we're going to have this grown-up conversation, we could see more money invested to ensure that those 2 million people could get more mental health support?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman raises important points, and they are absolutely core to the consultation that is now carrying on. We can't, if the corollary to the Honourable Gentleman's argument is that we should not do anything, that we should stay with a system that has not been revisited for over a decade, despite the fact that the terrain has changed very substantially, not least in terms of the increase in those suffering from mental health conditions. And I say no. I think we need to have a grown-up conversation about these matters if we are to provide better support for the people that I think we all care about right across this House.
Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, the Minister's right, as economic and activity rates have soared because of ill health. We do owe it to people, if it is possible, to get them back into work. It's for their own good. And also, as the cost soars, we owe it to hard-working taxpayers that they should have the bill minimised. But I must say, given that these proposals have come at the tail end of this government, which is weeks or months to go, I doubt very much if it's going to become a reality for many people. But could I ask him one question? This issue is devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly. Has he had any discussions with the Executive about these proposals? What response has he got? And should the Executive go in a different direction, what are the economic consequences for the Northern Ireland Executive's budget?
Secretary of State.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right to raise the issue of work being very important in the context of mental health. That's a very strongly held belief that I have. He's also right, though, to raise the issue of the sustainability, fiscally, of our welfare benefits system. And if the public is to continue to have confidence in our welfare system, we do have to get the balance right between the requirements that the taxpayer will have as well as our absolute determination to support those who need support the most. He asked a specific question about the Northern Ireland Executive, and indeed he is right. It is possible for Northern Ireland to decide to manage their benefits in a different way to England. That is not traditionally what has happened. Traditionally, Northern Ireland has followed the moves that we have made. But as to discussions, then absolutely, there are always close ongoing discussions between my department and their counterparts in Northern Ireland.
John MacDonald.
The Secretary of State has said the government's approach is fair and compassionate. Can you tell me what is compassionate about the language used by the Prime Minister over the last fortnight, where he's referred to a sick note culture? He's implied that people forced to rely upon benefits do so as a lifestyle choice. Today he's talking about the arrests, seizures and crackdowns against benefit claimants. The Disability Poverty Group, which comprises all the major charities we've all worked with, said that they described the speech as chilling, threatening and stigmatising. Does the Secretary of State not realise that language like the Prime Minister's used increases prejudice against disabled people and actually contributes to the escalation of hate crime against disabled people?
Well, the Prime Minister shares the view that I have, which is that it's really important that we achieve the best possible outcomes for the people that we are discussing in this statement. He cares a great deal, and I think he said at the end of his speech that he wanted to help many people, some of whom are watching the screen flickering away while their opportunities are drifting off into the distance, or words to that effect. And that speaks from the heart. That speaks from the heart. That says that we have a Prime Minister who cares deeply that opportunities in society should be made as widely available as possible. And that is a view, that is a characteristic and a quality that I admire and I share with him.
Neil Coyne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has upset disabled people and many organisations with his clumsy, negative juvenile approach, including Mind, who've asked for a grown-up conversation, including because today the Secretary of State has said at the dispatch box there's never been a review of PIP. There have been 2 independent reviews commissioned by the department, so perhaps he could correct the record when he gets to his feet. But PIP is not an out-of-work benefit, so when will the department publish its assessment of the impact of these latest cuts on disabled people using PIP to support themselves in work?
Well, it is the case that there has not been a fundamental review of PIP on the basis that that has subsequently led to a change in that benefit. So it is the case that that benefit has remained fundamentally the same for over a decade. It actually came in 2013, as the Honourable Gentleman will know. In terms of what assessments may or may not be made available, I think that will come at the point that the government comes to conclusions having conducted the consultation.
Nigel Whittam.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, members of this House may remember that 3 years ago I had to take a leave of absence from this role because I have PTSD. And I can tell you that the insinuation that mental health conditions are not debilitating, that they don't affect your ability to go about your daily life or to go to work, that they don't incur additional costs, could not be further from the truth. The Prime Minister's comments about so-called sick note culture and the changes that the government is proposing will do nothing to help people with mental illnesses. It will just make their lives harder. So I ask, why is the government setting back the clock on the acceptance of mental illness as a disability instead of truly tackling the crisis in mental health support?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm afraid, I'm pains to say this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because at every point that I've come to the dispatch box this afternoon, I think I've made it extremely clear that serious mental health conditions are very real. I take them very seriously. I think everyone in this House, I say to the Honourable Lady, and this is where I say we need a grown-up conversation. This is important. This is really important. We need a proper conversation about this, because if at every stage, whenever a minister suggests that we need to look at a particular area, that their motives get impugned in the way that the Honourable Lady has by inferring that what I'm actually saying is that mental health conditions, should be trivialised in any way. I am most definitely not saying that.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My constituent Elizabeth has been a very hard worker, but also someone who's suffered from ill health. And she came to see me at my surgery on Friday to express her alarm about the Prime Minister's speech on the 19th of April and his proposals for sick notes, and what she sees as his lack of respect for the professionalism of general practitioners. And if this issue came up in the Chamber, she asked me to ask the relevant minister this question. How can a random DWP assessor faced with a complete stranger on the briefest of interactions be relied upon to produce a more accurate and objective assessment of a patient's condition than her own general practitioner?
Well, can I firstly say, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I know the Prime Minister shares this view, that we owe a huge debt of gratitude to our GPs right up and down the country. They have a highly pressurised job, and they do it extremely well. On the issue of DWP assessors, these are highly trained individuals. There are very clear guidelines as to how assessments should be fairly conducted. They are, as the Right Honourable Lady will know, open to appeal where that's necessary. And of course, she mentions GPs. It may well be that as part of the assessments that are finally concluded by a DWP team member rather than the assessor themselves, taking into account all the evidence, it may well be that GPs actually input into many of those decisions.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Secretary must understand that the rhetoric coming from government over the last few weeks has been brutal, it's been divisive, and it's been inducing unimaginable terror in the 2/3 of people already in destitution who have a chronic health condition or disability, and the prospect of further cuts is making this situation worse. So can the Secretary confirm today whether he expects overall government PIP spending to be reduced, by how much, and what assessment has he made of how his proposals will affect those who are already in material deprivation?
Well, the presumption that the Honourable Lady makes is that the alternative to consulting on a different and potentially much better way forward is to do nothing at all, and to me that is unacceptable. In terms of making sure that we truly support all those that need that support, I've already given that reassurance at the dispatch box. It is made very clear in the consultation that indeed we recognise that there will be people who need more support than they're receiving at the moment, but we need to have that conversation in order to get the best outcomes.
Ms Twist.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Language matters, as we have heard, and the language and the rhetoric, perhaps not from the Secretary of State himself, but from others, has been one of minimising the impact of mental health conditions, which are real and which are serious. So what I would like to know is, what are the Secretary of State, what are the government's plans to ensure that proper treatments are available, not just talking therapies, but whatever the appropriate treatment is, to ensure that people with mental health conditions are treated appropriately?
The Honourable Lady raises an extremely important point. We have a growth in the prevalence of mental health conditions in our country. There are many reasons for that. I know the Labour Party like to say it's all about the NHS. It's about many other things, not least social media and young people. There are many causes of this situation. The consultation will look at exactly the question that the Honourable Lady quite rightly raises. She did mention the NHS talking therapies. I actually think that for some mental health conditions that are less severe in particular, combined with work actually, they can make a real difference. And I was very pleased that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, brought in 400,000 more of those talking therapies at his last fiscal event.
Sister Thurn.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Back in 2018, a bad concussion left me out of work for several months, and over time I became deeply depressed, worried and anxious that I'd ever really get back to full-time work at all. I was lucky that my employer was able to find and pay for me to get the support I needed to get back to work, and I'm lucky enough to be here today. But for many across the country, that simply isn't the reality they face currently. Why isn't the government really focusing on making sure everyone has the support they need to get back into work, rather than falling back into the kind of political posturing that will only add to the stress and anxiety that thousands are already feeling?
I'm very pleased that the honourable gentleman is now fit and well, and I'm sorry that he went through the difficult time that he described. We are doing a huge amount. The honourable gentleman may or may not be familiar with universal support, which is there to place people, the kind of people that he has described, into work, but critically to stay with them for a period of up to 12 months to make sure that they've got the support to hold that job down, because we know that work is good for those with mental health conditions. I've already referred to Wirral, which brings together those that have mental health challenges alongside work coaches who are able to see how work can fit within their recovery programme. So we are very much doing those, and if the honourable gentleman would like to see me at some point afterwards, I'll be very happy to sit down with him and talk him through some of the other approaches that we're taking.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Today's statement has been made necessary by the huge deterioration in the nation's health and mental health since the pandemic. And I think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the whole House has to take responsibility, because this House voted for draconian lockdowns which devastated mental health, particularly amongst the young. This House voted to mandate untested experimental treatments, threatening people that they'd lose their jobs if they didn't take them, while giving immunity from prosecution to the manufacturers for their dangerous and defective products. Will the Minister do the best thing he can for public mental health by assuring the British public that these mistakes have been learned and will never be inflicted upon them again?
I'm afraid, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I just simply don't subscribe to the theories that the honourable gentleman promotes, and I think it's probably best to leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, yes, on that one. Right, we are now coming... can I first of all, thank the Secretary of State for his statement and for responding to questions in the way that he did. We now come to points of order. Sian Warra.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And during the urgent question on the humanitarian situation in Gaza on April the 17th, the member for Macclesfield, who was speaking on behalf of the Foreign Secretary, said that the government wanted an independent review of the terrible killing of British aid workers by the Israeli Defence Forces. And that followed on from the Foreign Secretary himself posting on X that a wholly independent review was required. However, in response to my written question, the Deputy Foreign Secretary said that the Prime Minister had called for a transparent investigation into that terrible attack. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a transparent investigation is not the same as an independent investigation. And given that the whole point of my question was in the Chamber was to highlight that investigations conducted by the IDF into the actions are not independent, this answer troubled me. And given also that the Foreign Secretary refuses to come to this chamber to be held accountable, can you advise me how I can clarify that the Minister did not accidentally mislead the House in saying that the government wanted an independent investigation when it's only calling for a transparent investigation, and all those who seek accountability for the actions of the IDF want to know what the government's position is?
For giving notice of her point of order. Clearly the Chair is not responsible for the answer of ministers, but I will say that the Treasury bench will have heard the point of order that she has made and make sure that the Minister is able to respond to her. Point of order, Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I seek your advice on how we in this House can ensure that the National Security Online Information Team investigates the Facebook groups that Greenpeace exposed at the weekend, where the Tory mayoral candidate Susan Hall is a member of, where they have put on this group that they plan to kill our current mayor Sadiq Khan. Mr Deputy Speaker, how can we ensure the government investigates this, please?
Well, I'm sure that well, can I thank the honourable member for her point of order and a forward notice of it, and I'm sure that she herself could make contact with any organisations which can investigate the serious allegations that she has just made. Thank you for all that. Munira Wilson, point of order.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, earlier today, the Minister for School Standards said that the statistic I quoted on secondary teacher recruitment targets was incorrect, often repeated and not right. I'm afraid it's the Minister himself who is incorrect. The Department for Education's own website states in bold that 50% of the ITT recruitment target for secondary teachers was reached in 2023-2024, which is what I said. And in raw numbers, that's 13,102 secondary school trainees were recruited onto courses out of the 26,360 the government said were needed. Mr Deputy Speaker, you don't need maths to 18 to work out that's less than 50% of the target. And furthermore, what I said in my question was that some subjects were missing those targets by 50%, yet in many subjects they are missing them by way more, for instance physics, which only met 17% of its target. So Mr Deputy Speaker, have you had any indication if the Minister plans to correct the record, and if not, how do you suggest I go about securing a correction?
I thank the honourable member for her point of order and forward notice of it. The Chair again is not responsible for ministerial responses, but the Treasury Bench again will have heard the remarks that she has made, and of course we would expect any alterations or corrections to be made as soon as possible. Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Dame Rosie for the rest of the business.